Hello and welcome back, or welcome to the channel. I'm Loudguns, and today we're going to be taking a deep dive into the biggest and baddest of Star Citizen ships, the capitals. So we're going to be looking at why you should care about capital ships, what makes a ship a capital, and what capital ships have been announced already. And finally, because I do enjoy a little bit of blue sky thinking, we'll finish off at the end of the vid by talking about what gaps there might be in the current lineup for future addition to the roster. I've tried my best to leave as much as I can on the cutting room floor, but this vid is going to be a bit of a long one, so feel free to hit pause and grab a cup of tea. So let's start with why you should care about capital ships. And one thing I do want to make abundantly clear before we go way too deep down the rabbit hole, is that I don't think capital ships are awesome because they're a way to spend thousands of real world dollars. I don't want to encourage people to go spending excessive amounts of cash out of some form of FOMO or a desire to keep up with others. If you're comfortable with it and you want to support StarCit's development, then that's cool, but nobody has to go buying these things just to enjoy the game. And ultimately, everything's going to be available for players, and in this case organisations, to purchase in-game with UEC. And just something I think's worth saying because it does come up in conversations from time to time. Never feel like you have to buy something to be in an org, or for your org, No org leader that I've ever met who's worth their salt has ever asked somebody to have a certain ship to get into their org. But the reason I do get really excited about the behemoths of SC is what they could mean for endgame in the verse, and what they could represent for player orgs, giving players a reason to come together and work towards a common goal. Like when I was getting back into SC at the tail end of 2020, I'd just come from a stint of playing Elite Dangerous, and ED was this game that I enjoyed but I just couldn't love. My big issue was the lack of true multiplayer. For all the size and scope of Elite, it felt like an empty universe with far too much space for the limits of the actual gameplay. However, it did pique my interest in space games more generally, and I dusted off my StarCit credentials and hopped back in. So it was right about that time that the Arlington Gang mission chain released, culminating in a fight with a stolen Idris. The thing I think SC gets right is scale. So even from the outside looking in, capital ships are gargantuan vessels. The Idris, bristling with turrets and sporting its massive railgun, felt like a total monster, and I, zipping around in my cutty black, felt like a fly compared to it. So when I stepped back and realised that the intention of CIG was to make these ships fully accessible to players, with complete interiors that could house an entire small org, I was pretty much sold. I don't know about you, but as a kid I spent far too many sunny afternoons locked away inside geeking out over Warhammer 40k. So while I've got the greatest respect for the Verse's expert fighter pilots, for me my dream of space combat is very much these giant ships wailing on each other until one of the captains screams reactor death at the top of their lungs. So cue Xeno threat, and I know that after a few rounds of this dynamic event some of us old hands might have got a little bored by dint of repetition. But the sight of the UE's Javelin duking it out with Xeno threats multiple Idrises amongst a cloud of fighters and medium ships, it's truly a sight to behold. And if that's got old for you, just take the time when it's next up to grab a few new players and take them along with you on a multi-crew ship like the Tally, Redeemer, Hammerhead, because seeing their jaw hit the floor might help dust the cobwebs off the experience for you. A quick aside while we're on the subject of new players, if you're watching these vids to see if SC might be for you, then just make sure you use a referral code when you create an account. Mine's up on screen, but if you've got a mate who plays, use theirs. And then when it comes to it, get yourself a starter pack to see if the game's for you. We're talking about the deep end of Star Citizen in this video, and I wouldn't advise anyone to dive in at it. Also, as we're going to see, if you want to make it out of dry dock in one of these ships, when they're put into player hands, you're going to need to be working with some of your buddies. So thankfully the Star Citizen community is one of the best, most welcoming groups that I've come across, so that shouldn't be too hard. And if you are looking for a group, then feel free to hop on over to the Frontier community. Our Discord link's just down in the video description below. Now that I've convinced you, if you needed any convincing, that capital ships are cool, I guess we should quickly define what makes a ship a capital ship. Ships in Star Citizen all have a set of components: power plants, quantum drives, shield generators, etc. And these come in 4 different sizes: small, medium, large and capital. So what we're going to do is basically assume that as long as a ship has at least one capital ship component, we're going to classify it as a capital ship. And for the most part that seems to line up with what CIG have said at various points when they've talked about specific ships, and with what they've got on the ship matrix. There's one notable exception, so don't jump on me in the comments just yet. Some of these ships do have multiple variants, so just jumping straight to the Idris here, it's got the Idris P, M, and K. So I'm just lumping that as one ship, and as we go through them, we will discuss their variants if they have any. So with all that said, let's go on with taking a look at the ships themselves. The Polaris from RSI is amongst the smallest of the capital class ships. Clocking in at 155 metres long, this corvette focuses on delivering a substantial alpha strike through the use of its torpedoes. More specifically, the Polaris has a total payload of 28 size 10 torpedoes, so bearing in mind that the largest ones we've got in game at the moment in the Retaliator and the Eclipse are size 9s. So these can be fired in a brace of 4 at a time from its launchers. And the ship also sneaks in 32 size 3 anti-fighter missiles. The ship isn't shy of a few other guns either, with a total of 8 turrets, 6 manned and 2 remote, sporting size 4 and 5 weaponry. Add into this the hangar, which can bring along something the size of the Sabre or smaller, or indeed the perfectly matched RSI Scorpius, which fits thanks to its folding ability. And you've got yourself a decent little support vessel as well. The main idea though is to get in quick and nuke a larger target out of existence with the torps, making the Polaris the perfect ship to aim for if you're looking to go hunting larger prey. I particularly like the idea of a wolf pack of maybe 3 or 4 Polarises teaming up to go and take on something huge, using their greater flexibility and manoeuvrability to encircle and slice up a bigger target. As well as the payload, the Polaris is well outfitted for longer sessions, with a medbay, a brig, an armoury, and space for a ground vehicle such as the Ursa rover. And to my mind, the Polaris is going to be in something of a Goldilocks zone when it comes to ships. You're still into that capital status, you've still got a real multi-crew experience, but the crew requirement of 6 to 14 is just much more feasible than some of the larger ships we'll see further up this list. So while something like an Idris or a Javelin might stay in the garage until the weekends when you have enough people to man it, the Polaris could easily be seeing use with much more regularity. In Starset, capital ships are not reserved for the combat crowd, and there are a number of industrial and trade ships that also make this grade. So sneaking into the categorization with a single capital class component, its power plant, is the Aegis Reclaimer. This is the first of the capitals that's actually possible to buy and fly in game right now, although sadly without its main game loop implemented. This is, based on what's been announced so far, the pinnacle of salvage ships. That said, there are only 2 so far, the Vulture being the other, so with salvage due to be in player hands with 318, we can probably expect that to change over time. While the Vulture focuses on stripping derelict hulls for valuable materials used in the coating, the Reclaimer is designed to slice and dice wrecks, then chomp the pieces up into its maw. The giant telescopic claw on the front will extend out to grab a desired part of a ship, while a series of tractor beams and a manned cutter can then be used to get the part down to size and inside the ship for processing. Industrial capitals are quite a bit less demanding than their combat-focused cousins in terms of crew count, so the Reclaimer takes 4 to 5 people to run. And in case it wasn't excruciatingly obvious at this point, I do love a bit of sci-fi. I particularly enjoyed a little lore post the second run, that I'll link in the vid description. In this, the protagonist Sori hitches a ride on a Reclaimer that's been converted to carry additional passengers. And this makes me wonder if some of these huge capital industrial ships are going to take a leaf from Firefly in the future, taking on passengers as they traverse the stars to make a bit of side cash. The Consolidated Outland Pioneer is the one ship that I couldn't work out whether to include or not. On the one hand, the current specifications don't include any size 4 capital parts, but on the other hand, the ship matrix has it listed as a capital. But on the other hand, I apparently have 3 hands now. The matrix is often referred to as the matrix of lies, so either bit of info could be wrong, so I included it to be safe. What we do know is that the Pioneer is the largest, and also smallest, and also only dedicated construction ship announced so far in Star Citizen. Described as a factory ship, the Pioneer was originally envisaged as a 3D printer for outposts. Now, at the time it was released, the plan was for outposts to be very formulaic and repetitive, with a cuboid uniformity, the likes of which you see all around Stanton. However, with more recent updates on outposts, we've seen a huge variety of structure, so I would imagine we're going to see some significant evolution in the Pioneer's design before it ends up in player hands. I do really like the utilitarian feel of this ship though. It exudes a real workplace aura, with a blend between functionality with a tiny bit of comfort thrown in. But it all comes in a much cleaner package than you might find on something from say Drake, the Versus primary no-frills manufacturer. The layout feels right too, and I like the incorporation of a landing pad on top of the ship as opposed to a hangar. I don't believe the Pioneer is intended to act as a carrier, so it shouldn't be able to QT travel with a ship on top of it. This is more for when you've landed at your construction site so that you can bring in a ship like a Freelancer or a Nomad to feed the beast with raw mats. If you're keen to learn more about CIG's plans for base building and land claim mechanics, and this video isn't enough for you for one day, then I do have another deep dive which focuses on just that, so I'll pop a link in the description just in case. We've got to be a little bit careful on the MISC Endeavor, because I reckon every time someone brings it up to John Crew it gets delayed a little bit more. But having said that, there are plenty of reasons to be excited about this ship, so you can understand why people continue to ask. The Endeavor is the king of modularity. The base ship itself offers relatively little, but with a wide variety of modules you can chop and change how you kit yours out for different high-end tasks. The current list of modules includes biodomes for growing crops, a hospital for offering tier 1 healing and respawn, a telescope for scanning distant points of interest, a hadron collider to aid in overclocking ship components, a hangar for small ships, and a range of smaller modules like research labs, science pods, fuel pods, and additional crew quarters. You're set to be able to design your own setup as long as the size of the modules doesn't exceed the Endeavor's capacity of 6 slots or installation limits. Some of the modules have a max number per Endeavor, so for instance while the biodome, which has 2 domes, only takes up a 2x1 space, you can install a maximum of 2 of these modules, so you cap out at 4 biodomes rather than the 6 you might think you'd be able to get. So while the Endeavor and the modules can all be purchased separately, there are currently 3 preset packages, so this gives you the Hope class medical variant, which features the medical bay and landing bay modules to give a ready-made hospital ship equipped for patients to summon their ship and take off after treatment. The Discovery class has a pure science focus with a combination of general research, general science and crew modules. And the Olympic class is the agricultural variant with the iconic quadruple biodomes. One long-running joke around the Frontier community is that the officers are going to leave me without anything to do, so I'll end up getting into space gardening. One thing I could see is CIG taking a similar pathway to the Endeavor as they have taken with the Aegis Retaliator. They could feasibly release one version and look to add the modularity in at a later date. My credits would be on the Hope Hospital version, as it would help to bring in the next levels of medical gameplay. Honestly, I'd be quite happy if modularity to this degree was fudged to some extent. Take your Endeavor to a shipyard, select the components at a terminal and pay a fee, and then spawn in your Endeavor with the new setup without actually seeing the parts change. But that said, I'm far away from being any form of game dev, so maybe I'll shut up about that sort of thing before someone points out how dumb my idea is. So how about something that's in-game, flyable and buyable with your hard-earned credits? So just shy of 32.3 million credits will get you your very own Origin A90 Jump, the largest luxury vehicle on the market. Those credits will get you the best money can buy in the form of your very own super space yacht, resplendent with ornate features including this, my favourite star case in all of Star Citizen. As well as opulent living quarters for you and your guests, you also get a bar and restaurant, spa complete with saunas and a pool, leisure facilities and a basketball court that doubles as a hangar. As well as the hangar, you have space for a ground vehicle, and other than the Crusader Hercules series, the 890J is one of the only ships that will carry the largest of the ground vehicles in game, like the Anvil Ballista. Even your menial staff are enjoying the good life with spacious crew quarters and leisure facilities to while away the time between shifts. And while we await the full luxury passenger game loop, you can always just get hammered and embarrass yourself at the office party in the meantime. The MISC Hull D couldn't be further from the luxury experience of the 890 though. This skeletal mass hauler is the first of 2 hulls that make it into the capital classification. No points for guessing the name of the second one. Its strength lies in the sheer amount of cargo it can transport, while not requiring much in the way of crew, so the D can carry a whopping 20,736 SEU of cargo, Just to step back and put that in perspective, that's about 30 Hercules C2s, which are currently our largest hauler. So meanwhile it can operate just fine with a crew of 3, and maxes out at 5 people, making it highly efficient. The minimum crew would give you a pilot, co-pilot and a loadmaster to manage the ship's dedicated cargo panel, while the max of 5 points to you having the ability to fly while using all 4 of the defensive turrets. In terms of armament though, the ship is understandably underwhelming. 4 turrets with a mixture of size 3 and 4 weaponry is a pretty minimalistic complement for a ship of this size. In the Q&A it was confirmed that you could solo the ship, and to be honest, with its limited defensive capabilities, I'd personally prefer to have more friends in escort ships than actually on board if we were down to that number of people. CIG also confirmed that the Hull's D and E will be capable of carrying more than just the standard commodities we're currently used to in their containers. Even smaller ships could be disassembled and transported in the boxes, meaning that these ships could become a key element of org logistics. For its strengths, the Hull D does come with some severe weaknesses above and beyond the weaponry though. So as with the smaller Hull C, the Hull D cannot land planet side. So you're going to have to rely on smaller ships to synergize with, dropping off your load at a space station's cargo deck, allowing appropriate ships to deal with the final mile, or tens of thousands of kilometers. Also, as we've already looked at, your defensive capabilities aren't up to much in this ship, and on top of that you're a bit of a loot pinata, with all the cargo attached to the ship externally, making you a pretty juicy target for pirates. I think we'll probably see the larger hulls primarily in safer systems or operating in convoys with plenty of protection as things get a little bit more sketchy. This type of general balance though is something I think CIG are getting right. I love that the strengths and weaknesses of different ships almost ensure that we'll have to work together to accomplish our goals, and create targets of opportunities for other players to bring us together in, not so friendly ways. I've generally been going through these capital ships in order of length, but I think I'll break away from that momentarily to tick off the Hull E at this stage as well, since it follows on very organically from the Hull D. Just incorporate everything we just learned on the Hull D and make it bigger. Cargo capacity balloons to 98,304 SEU, making it far and away the largest hauler by cargo announced. You have pretty much the same guns, although now you go up to dual size 4s and dual size 5s. And you can double up the fuel capacity with 4 capital size fuel tanks and 2 capital quantum fuel tanks. So with these like giant swimming pools of gas, the Hull E is set to have the longest range on a single fill out of any ships in game. However, you'll have to make sure you hold back some of your trading profits for when it comes time to pay the piper and fill her up. While I was reading, I came across this response in one of the Q&As and I felt it was a really good summary of why you should choose one hull over the other, that really applies to the whole series. Effectively, it's a sliding scale with more cargo space equaling less speed and manoeuvrability, so it's up to you to really decide which hull best suits your needs. I would add that for me, with the sheer amount of cargo being talked about here, it's also about risk, so as my friend Arethusa said when we were discussing this, eggs meet basket. Sticking with the cargo trade, we have a firm fan favourite, the Banu merchantman, and this provides a really good bit of juxtaposition to the MISC Hull series. For the Banu, one of SC's alien species, the merchantmen are a family heirloom passed between generations. The ship's not only a cargo hauler, but also a marketplace and indeed a home for the owners. If I'm allowed to dip back into my Warhammer 40k fandom, the ship gives me some serious rogue trader vibes. The BMM is another ship that's grown in stature through its design process, a common theme with CIG. So the scale up took what was originally a large ship into capital territory. In order to ensure that the ship can still land in the largest hangars, the team had to adjust the wings to add a folding mechanic. In terms of raw cargo space, the BMM loses out to the whole series. A total SCU capacity of 2,800 puts it at a bit over half of a Hull C, and way below the Hull's D and E. However, this cargo sits internally, so fully protected by the ship's shields and armour. The BMM can also comfortably land on planets and moons, meaning it can take advantage of a wider array of markets. And speaking of markets, there's also an onboard marketplace spread over 2 floors, with 4 shops on each for a total of 8. This will allow the ship to land at a station or landing zone, and open up the bazaar for local residents, potentially offering goods from far-flung zones that they otherwise wouldn't have access to. I think this creates really interesting opportunities for players to trade with each other. and maybe a certain BMM crew will get safe passage through otherwise hazardous space because the roguish residents know that this is the only way to get their hands on certain goods. For higher end deals, there's a full negotiation room overlooking the cargo bay, allowing everyone to keep an eye on the goods they're negotiating over. All this cargo could easily make you a juicy target, so it's a good job that the BMM has a spicy complement of weaponry on board. While the Banu are commerce obsessed, they're also clearly no strangers to putting up a fight. The BMM sports a pair of massive sized 8 guns, 3 crew operated turrets, 1 with dual size 5s and 2 with dual size 4s, and to fend off missiles there are 4 size 3-point defense guns. I love how a lot of thought has gone into avoiding aggression in the ship's silhouette. So on a normal day you don't want to rock up scaring your customers with your giant guns, so the vast majority of the weaponry is concealed and expands out of recesses in the hull. There is also an integrated hangar designed to accommodate a Banu defender, so that means it should fit a large variety of fighters to provide you with some additional support, or potentially space for a quick runaround vehicle in case your crew are busy loading and unloading the cargo and you want to head off into town. I am, as you might have guessed, a big fan of this ship. And I feel it packs in everything you'll need for extended voyages out in the black, including a med bay and comfortable quarters for both your crew and your guests. I'd expect that this one will be quite a bit of work to acquire in the verse, given their relative scarcity in the lore. And I wonder if it will be a ship locked behind more than just credit grind, potentially with a rep element involved. Now, I realise that we started with a combat ship, but since then have been going through more industrial and trade focused ships, but fear not, we're about to get into some of the big guns of the RSI universe. The Aegis Idris is a 242 metre frigate. What makes a frigate, I hear you ask? Shrug emoji, I reply. In the real world there are many different definitions depending on which navy is talking, but in Star Citizen it seems to be bigger than a corvette and smaller than a destroyer. So hopefully we'll get a bit more detail on that in the future. Regardless of any of this, the Idris is a beast. The M is your full-blown military version with a size 10 railgun mounted on the spine. The P on the other hand is the stripped down Peacekeeper version for public sale that's had a lot of the weaponry pulled off it and lacks some of the armour. While the K is effectively an aftermarket kit for the P to add back a size 10 beam weapon from our very own Hurston Dynamics. It is worth noting that there is some difference in terms of the armour, but none of the hard points actually change across the variants. So it's purely what they come equipped with, so assuming you can somehow get your hands on a railgun, you could take a P and make it back into pretty much an M. So with that in mind, we'll mostly talk about the M's weaponry, since this represents the pinnacle of what you could do with the ship. So as well as the notorious size 10 railgun, there are a total of 8 player controlled turrets, 1 with dual size 7s, 5 dual size 5s and 2 dual size 4s. Just in case what you were aiming at didn't die already, the Idris also carries 10 size 8 torpedoes. In terms of protection, you have 2 capital size shield generators, and you can always run the Arlington gang mission chain to the end if you want to see just how much of a pounding the ship can take. One thing which is yet to develop in SC is armour, and that's going to matter a lot for capital ship combat going forward. Currently we're in something of a DPS race, and it doesn't matter what you're firing at, you can do damage. Add enough damage together, ship goes boom. In the future, the sort of weaponry you would find attached to a light fighter is simply just not going to penetrate a capital ship's armour. This should create a really cool dynamic, I think, where fighters are worrying more about contesting enemy fighters and preventing enemy bombers from drawing a bead on friendly capitals, as opposed to circling round rapidly and delivering death by 1,000 flea bites. Internally, the Idris is a warship through and through, so you can expect fairly Spartan living conditions while serving out your tour on board. One thing that jumps out about the Idris is just how little wasted space there is in this ship. And this is really down to just how much work has gone into it given its starring role in Squadron 42. So while you can pick a side of the fence when it comes to the great PU versus Squadron 42 debate, this really does showcase how good the designers can get at cramming stuff in. So on board you'll find all the amenities for the crew, including a med bay, mess hall, dormitories and even a shooting range. You've got a hangar capable of taking up to 2 medium fighters and an Argo MPUV in its own dedicated bay for helping to shuttle personnel around or restock the ship. The crew complement's listed as 8 to 28, but it's notable that in military ships CIG tend to factor in contingency, making sure there are more folks in a max crew than there are stations for them. This may allow you to have a team of Marines on board, but it also seems to allow for the fact that the crew need to sleep, but the ship should always remain combat ready. The Kraken from Drake Interplanetary is billed as a light carrier. Given the UE Navy's refusal to buy anything from Drake, the Kraken's pitched more at local militia groups to help defend their territory from attack. Although, knowing Drake, I'm going to guess that a good few Krakens are going to take pride of place as the flagship of a pirate fleet doing that pillaging. As it currently stands, the ship has 6 landing pads, 4 on the side suit smaller fighters, while the 2 upper platforms accommodate medium-sized ships. And on top of this you have internal hangar space where you can store additional craft, and a Dragonfly bay for keeping your hover bikes. Compared with internal hangars seen on ships like the Polaris and Idris, the Kraken's pads should provide an advantage when it comes to quickly scrambling your force, and there isn't a risk that a single malfunctioning doorway will limit your ability to launch all your ships. But on the downside, the open nature offers far less protection, and details in the Q&A suggest that the Kraken's shields won't extend over the ships on the pads. Along with accommodation for the crew of 10, you'll also find guest quarters for 1 to 2 people per pad, giving you beds for anyone who reasonably might end up aboard. That said, these basic habs are described as like those at Grim Hex, so don't go expecting the Ritz here. And while Drake has a no frills rep, it has been confirmed that the Kraken will get a medpay as it goes further into design. And that does bring it in line with other capitals of this size, so I think that's a good thing. One of the things I love about the Kraken is the level of versatility it brings to the table. So I do an entire series getting organised where I try to plan fleets for orgs focusing on different gameplay niches in Star Citizen. And time again, when I go up to the scale of 100 plus player orgs and introduce a capital ship, the Kraken appears. Just because the brochures are all pew pew boom boom, doesn't mean the ship can't be utilised differently by players. So the pads could easily be used for mining or salvage ships just as well as combat ones. Adding to this versatility is the 3,792 SCU cargo capacity of the ship, and this could be used to keep spare parts for repairs along with fuel and ammunition, but it could also make the Kraken doing a reasonable bit of haulage on the side, just to help your org pay the upkeep bills. If you want to really push this, you can always opt for the Kraken Privateer aftermarket kit from Cousin Crows. So this full conversion will turn your Kraken into a floating shopping mall, sacrificing pure cargo capacity for a marketplace that offers both public shops and a private zone, for doing some shadier deals you might want to make away from prying eyes. Regardless of which version you opt for, you're going to get the same weaponry though, with a total of 9 turrets dotted around the ship to provide coverage. 1 dual size 8, 4 dual size 6s and 4 dual size 5s. The Kraken isn't designed for a straight up fight to the same extent that the Idris or Javelin are though. In true Drake style, you can't expect the same level of armour to protect you in a firefight. I'd imagine you're meant to try and hang out of harm's way, while the complement of craft you can launch off your decks and out of your hangars do the talking. The RSI Orion is a true industrial mining platform, designed to take on a role that was previously the sole reserve of Megacorps. Originally pitched to 170 metres long, the Orion's since doubled to a massive 340 metres. And as an avid miner, I'm not complaining. On board, you'll find a full array of mining equipment, with tractor beams to pull in smaller rocks and a laser on a telescopic arm, similar to the Reclaimer's claw. In early docs, this was described as a size 6, could be a typo, or it could be a full 4 steps above what we currently have in game. The Orion also features a maw of grinders, suggesting that maybe you just shovel smaller rocks into its greedy mouth as opposed to using extraction lasers. The Orion also comes with a built-in refinery, so no need to work out how to offload raw ores onto a separate ship, and this should allow you to keep ploughing through those asteroid belts, condensing down the materials you mine along the way. The ship's noted as being fully compatible with Mark IV remote mining devices. Drones are something that we have minimal hard info on to date, but it'll be really interesting to see how these are developed. I can imagine a couple of the crew on this ship being responsible for operating drones, potentially maybe with size 1 lasers, or maybe even size 0 like the ones you find on the rocks so you can take advantage of any gem deposits you come across. In my deep diving into the RSI site, I did come across an old browser game, Orion Vault Alone in the Verse, which had players commanding an Orion, scanning an area, drilling a site, and then using drones to prospect, dragging materials back to the Orion using a sled. So potentially this is just an early idea which won't go anywhere or surface again, but it could offer a little glimpse into the way drones might be used in the future. There are a set of giant revolving saddlebags for storing raw minables, with a bulk capacity listed as 16,288 SCE. Although of course this might not have been updated and could easily go down, so don't be disappointed by that. Regardless, we know it's going to be big. Habitation areas are going to be fitted in along the edges of the central ore corridor, which runs down the length of the ship. And this is going to create these rooms with really distinctively slanted walls, that I think will just cement the industrial credentials of the ship. But given that this is an RSI design, I think we can expect a fair degree of creature comforts for the 6 crew on board. Star Citizen's destroyer, the Aegis Javelin, is the largest ship that's been made available to players to purchase. That said, it would set you back $3,000, so let's maybe not get into that too much and focus on the ship itself. In terms of firepower, things get a little messy, so the ship matrix is clearly out of date, and some of the game data coming out via StarCitizen.tools appears to be a bit jumbled. So with my disclaimer out of the way, I'm going to try and translate it, but please don't hate on me if I get this wrong. So the Javelin appears to have a total of 15 turrets. Working our way from largest to smallest, we have 2 massive dual size 8s, 6 dual size 7s, and 7 dual 5s. But please, if you know differently, just let me know down in the comments. So on top of this, the ship has 2 size 12, yes those are 12, torpedo launchers, with a total payload of 32 torpedoes. It does beg the question, what exactly is the Jav going to be firing these at? But we do have larger capital ships out there to consider, and an interesting snippet from the Polaris Q&A was a brief mention of using torps in the context of sieges against fixed targets such as space stations. 4 capital-sized shield generators offer protection, and in true Aegis fashion, the armour is set to be robust to say the least. Working our way down through the ship, the bridge gives a suitably commanding position and holds the majority of command positions. So bridge positions include seats for the captain, XO, comms, weapons, radar, helm, and a science officer. As befits the rank of those nearby, the bridge leads directly onto the first set of escape pods, should things go a bit Pete Tong and you want to abandon your crew. The top deck provides accommodation for the captain and XO. It also gives access to the internal modules, which we'll come back to. Mid-deck is the core of the ship with access to the 2 torp bays and the broadside turrets. The deck also hosts engineering, the medical bay, brig, crew quarters, mess hall, and access to the onboard hangar which spreads over the mid and bottom deck. This is designed to take an Aegis Redeemer gunship, capable of dropping in a team of marines and providing them with fire support along the way. The bottom deck is somewhere the captain may never tread. I can't look at this without flashbacks to the lower deck series from Star Trek. But this deck is primarily turret access, cargo, and an overflow for engineering in the hangar. A key strength of the Javelin is its internal modularity. As well as the standard crew and officers' quarters, medbay, armory, hangar, etc., the Javelin has capacity for 6 additional modules. So we'll need to wait and see what functionality gets added with these, but the degree of customization this should give you for your Org's flagship is amazing. I do want to quickly note that buying a Javelin is not just an express ticket to interstellar domination. They have sort of said that they don't want it to be a ship that you just buy and win the game. So the Javelins which have been sold to players are expressly ones which have been, decommissioned from their military purpose so they could be sold to civilians. So even if you've already got one of these in your hangar, you and your org have still got a big task ahead to actually get that sort of back up to fighting standard. So if the Javelin isn't big enough for you, then maybe the Bengal is. The Bengal is a nearly 1 kilometer long fleet carrier built by Roberts Space Industries for the UAE Navy. So this is designed to carry multiple squadrons of fighters and other ships. It's got over 90 turrets, including an appropriately named Ship Buster turret with quad size 12 railguns. If that alone wasn't enough, on top of this you've also got a total of 44 size 8s, 24 size 6s and 76 automated size 7 guns. That's an obscene amount of firepower and quite difficult to say towards the end of a video. So diving into the exact components is, I personally think, kind of a rabbit hole. The ship was added as a hull for the Invictus event this year and last, so while we have game data for it, parts are almost certainly just placeholders at this stage. For instance, this ship comes with the same quantum drive as the Cutlass Black, so I don't think so. The Bengal carrier is not and has never been for sale. Chris Roberts has previously stated that CIG won't sell anything larger than the Javelin for players. However, if watching this you find yourself simply needing it in your life, then fear not. It's been hinted that eventually players will be able to find incredibly rare Bengal wrecks out in the verse, and these wrecks would take an entire org, or maybe multiple orgs, working together to repair and refit. But once done, you'd be a supreme power, and that'll have your enemies quaking in their space boots. And this brings us full circle to what I was talking about at the beginning. So for me, cap ships are exciting because of the endgame possibilities. I can imagine the level of coordination and effort that some groups of players are going to sink into ensuring that their org can come out in a Bengal. But then, due to its persistent nature in the verse, the level of attention that's going to attract from enemies who may wish to seize it from them or deny it to them. A big shout out to my friend Star Destroyer who mocked up this Bengal for me. He's working on a site, SC Org Tools, which I'll include a link to because it's got some really interesting stuff over there, so please go and check it out. So that brings us to the end of the list of confirmed capitals. I know some folks might point out that there are other names out there like the UEE Retribution Dreadnought or the Vandal Kingship, but the information on these two is so sparse that I'm not sure whether it makes sense to include them in a video yet. It's not even clear whether they're going to be added to the PU as more than just background flair. Now I sincerely hope that we get missions further down the line, potentially a dynamic event where a Vandal incursion spearheaded by a kingship is on its way to ravage a certain system, but we'll cover that as and when there's more information to go on. What I did want to close out with though were a few of my ideas for ships that could still be on the horizon, just by looking at the gaps in the matrix as it stands today. And do drop a comment down below to let me know if you think any of these make sense, or if you've got other ones that you want to see. So first I'd start with the decided lack of capital ships from one of the two premier military manufacturers in the verse, Anvil Aerospace. The lack of Anvil capitals is doubly suspicious when you consider that Aegis, the favoured manufacturer during the UEE's authoritarian Mesa era, has fallen out of favour in modern times, so potentially we could see some new designs from Anvil coming in to replace aging Aegis products. And one place an Anvil cap ship would be extremely welcome is in filling out the Corvette/small capital space. The Polaris is an excellent ship, not just because of its design or its payload, but because of the crew of 6 to 14. So what I'd love to see is a ship of that size that leans more towards guns and armour as opposed to torps and speed. Some sort of love child between the Perseus and Polaris, but just with more Anvil. The hangar could even be designed to deploy one of the new Anvil Legionnaires, with future work on physicalised damage set to increase the amount of disabled ships versus outright destruction. A ship designed to get in close like a boxer and then deploy a boarding craft would be pretty epic in my book. Similarly, I feel there's space for more carriers in the game. The excitement generated by both the Anvil Liberator and the Drake Kraken testifies to this. And with the demands of much larger systems than Stanton, carriers are going to be essential. Personally, I think the Kraken is going to have to do the standard thing and grow in size. The growth of the Cutlass Black has created a bit of a continuity issue for the Kraken, and I can't help but think that with the BMM having grown in size and carrying 8 shops by default, I just can't see the justification behind the Kraken Privateer if it remains the same size. There's also the Drake problem. The UEE Navy will not do business with Drake Interplanetary. So what exactly does the Navy use as a light carrier for when the Bengal would be overkill but the Idris or the Liberator wouldn't be enough? Moving to a more industrial mindset, I also wonder if there's space for a capital refinery ship. It was interesting to see it highlighted with the Expanse that the refinery will be important not only for mining but also for salvage. So it would make sense for me to have a standalone capital refinery ship. This could be a ship laden with tractor beams for bringing ore and other materials on board from smaller ships, but again I think there's potential here for another carrier, but this time with a more purified industrial nature than the versatility of the Kraken. Something with landing pads for a couple of moles or 3 to 4 prospectors and vultures, with the internals given over to a huge refinery, would be incredibly cool. It's a drum I know I've been beating for quite some time now, but my pick for this ship would be Argo. I've had a few disagreements with people who believe Argo's place in the world is very much at the smaller end, but I argue that Argo is a company that went from building shuttles to building MPUVs because they saw what was there wasn't good enough. So John Crew, if you were ever here and you're still watching, just name your price. So there we have it. That was our deep dive into the capital ships of Star Citizen. I know it was a long one, but honestly you don't realise just how much is out there until you start digging down into it. On Friday night I came up with an idea for a little capital ship focus video, and I'm ashamed that I'm not ashamed that I've done very little else with my time since. So if you did find this useful and you think my efforts merit it, then please consider dropping a like and hitting subscribe. We're pretty close to 10k now, which I honestly can't believe, so thank you all for your support. I'm not going to make this any longer than it already is by waffling on anymore, but since you made it this far, please do make sure to drop a comment down below and get yourself entered into the monthly giveaway. This month we've got an Anvil Legionnaire with LTI, which will go to one lucky commenter. And of course, a big thank you to my Patreon supporters for their continued help. They're really helping me sort of get kit to improve the quality of videos, so I really hope it's showing through, but undoubtedly somebody will tell me it's not. So with all that said though, thank you very much for watching all the way to the end, and I look forward to seeing you next time.